Donald Trump signed an executive order saying that people who were born in the US who didn't have at least one permanent resident parent or US citizen parent are not US citizens. This was issued with like 80 other executive orders right after he was sworn in on January 20th. And then 3 days later, on January 23rd, a judge out of Seattle, Washington, stopped this policy and basically said this was the most blatantly unconstitutional executive order or policy that he's ever seen. And for good reason. The 14th Amendment literally says any person born in the US or subject to the jurisdiction thereof is a US citizen. And I made another video about a week ago arguing that maybe there's some wiggle room in the phrase and subject to the jurisdiction thereof, but it's unlikely that the Supreme Court is going to agree with Trump that means that people born in the US to undocumented parents are not subject to the jurisdiction of the US. It most likely is referring to diplomats. So the only people born in the US who are not US citizens are children of diplomats. And arguably, that phrase subject to the jurisdiction thereof is referring to them because they are actually not subject to the jurisdiction of the US in several ways. I have a close friend who was born in the United States, and she came to me kind of freaking out after this executive order was issued because neither of her parents were permanent residents in the US when she was born, or US citizens. And so she was wondering if the Trump administration can strip her of her US citizenship. She's lived here her whole life basically, speaks perfect English, is a very productive member of society, has a great job, all the things. So the answer to her question is no. The executive order was prospective, not retroactive, which means it only applies to future births. It does not affect people who previously entered the US, which, could open a bit of a can of worms if we're looking at all of these historically white migrants coming from Europe who gave birth to people in the US, and now to say that, all these people are not US citizens, it would create some problems for Trump and his constituents. And let's face it, when Trump says he wants to stop immigration to the United States, or he says illegal immigration, what he's really saying is he wants less brown people coming to the United States. Anyway, racial politics aside, the order went into effect on January 20th. A judge shut it down on 23rd. The big question for me is, what happens to the people who were born during that 3-day window before the judge reversed the policy? We'll see what happens with that. But for now, people born on the 23rd or later are US citizens until the Supreme Court decides otherwise. And my opinion is that the US Supreme Court is going to rule with the Seattle judge that this is blatantly unconstitutional. It's in the 14th Amendment. If you want to change that policy, we would need an amendment changing the 14th Amendment, which would require 2/3 vote in both houses of Congress. And then 3/4 of the states would need to ratify that new amendment. So very unlikely that there will actually be a constitutional amendment. Also unlikely that this conservative Supreme Court, no matter how conservative they are, it's still very unlikely they will side with Trump on this very unconstitutional executive order. All right, guys, that brings us to the end of today's video. If there are any status updates on this executive order or whether birthright citizenship is at stake, I'll be sure to quickly create a new video on that subject. If you're new to my channel, be sure to subscribe. I put out regular videos on family-based immigration and naturalization. And I'll see you guys next week for another one.